what I was asked to talk about is digital assets and ESG. This is a very important priority for Hedera. Hedera is a public ledger, a DLT, a blockchain. And ESG is one of the things that people are very interested in using ledgers for. So this is about financial systems. Why are we interested in this? Well, many people are very interested in ESG, and it turns out that blockchain, DLTs, digital assets have a very big role to play in ESG. So let's just talk about that. In order to do things around ESG, environmental and so on, you need to be trusted. There is a lot of fraud out there. People do need something they can trust. Maybe when you're just doing consumer things, it's less important, but when you're doing financial and business things, trust becomes critical. You do need something you can trust. ESG, of course, is environmental and social and governance. So you need to be able to do things that are showing you are good for the environment, that are helping in social ways, helping society as a whole in some way, and have good governance and in helping you in your governance. And so ledgers, blockchains, DLTs, play a role in all three of these things. And Hedera plays a role in all three of these: environmental, social, and governance. So the challenges, of course, is that you may have heard that Bitcoin uses more energy than Argentina. This is true, and this is unfortunate. Not all ledgers use a lot of energy, though. Some ledgers use very little energy. You also have a problem that some ledgers are very slow and that they have high costs, which is bad, but also unpredictable costs. And that's a problem for a business. Maybe less so for the consumer, but for a business, you need to be able to plan your costs. And so unpredictable costs is also a problem. There are all kinds of security vulnerabilities that we keep hearing about. And then we have centralization and transparency concerns. Lots of ledgers are managed by some shadowy group of whoever ends up getting the unofficial power, and you don't really know who's controlling it. They say decentralized, but ultimately you end up with a handful of developers who end up controlling what the code is. And you don't have transparency in many cases. So what we really need in order for the use of the world for DLTs, for ESG things, you need very good performance, like 10,000 transactions every second. That's what we're doing. Finality in just a few seconds, which means within a few seconds, you know for sure the transaction has gone through. No question. It needs to be ABFT, asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant. This is the highest level of security. Among other things, it means that we are not leader-based, so you never have the problem that if somebody attacks one computer on their network, they can shut down the whole network. And a lot of ledgers do have this problem. Maybe the leader changes every few seconds, but if the attacker follows the leader, they can shut down the entire network for long periods. Again, maybe for consumers, it's not as important, but for businesses, it becomes extremely important. For financial services, it becomes extremely important. So we're not leader-based. We don't have that vulnerability. We're asynchronous BFT, ABFT, which means we don't have that vulnerability. And we also use proof of stake. So we're not having to use all that electricity. Our security comes from the scarcity of the H-bars, not from just wasting electricity. Great deal of secure stability. We're not going to be forking. The price is stable in US dollars. The price of a transaction does not fluctuate. That's important. And the governance, we have the most transparent, decentralized governance on the internet. Other ledgers will say, well, we're very decentralized. Okay, then who decides what was going to be running on your nodes? Well, it ends up being a handful of developers that end up getting the power just because everyone looks to them, and no one really knows how they make their decisions. For us, we have a council. 27 major companies and universities like UCL and like Google and IBM and LG. These are major organizations, a whole bunch of banks and financial institutions that are running Hedera. They jointly own Hedera, and they make all the decisions about what's running on the network. And they publish the minutes of their deliberations on this. They publish the roadmap, the treasury management, and the minutes of how they decide. So everything is transparent. And then in addition to that, you want sustainability. And so you want to be carbon negative. So carbon neutral, buy enough carbon credits to be carbon neutral, and then buy more to be carbon negative. In addition to that, it really should use a low amount of electricity. It isn't good for you to be using lots of electricity and then just buying carbon credits for various reasons we'll talk about. It's better just to use less electricity in the first place. So we have the lowest carbon footprint of any ledger before we buy our credits, and we buy carbon credits to be carbon neutral, and then more to be carbon negative. So The reason we're able to do all these things is that we use a hash graph, not a blockchain. I won't go into the details of it, but it allows you to be extremely secure and extremely fast at the same time. Fast means you could be cheap. So for all the things I've talked about other than governance, it's because it's a hash graph rather than a traditional blockchain. For governance, it's because we set up governance right, which is being jointly owned by large players that you know, that have a reputation, that you can trust to keep tabs on each other. The Hedera network, you can see at the bottom there, does the hash graph consensus I mentioned, and we have services built on it. So we have smart contracts. You can run little programs on it. We have a token service. You can do smart contracts that do a token, but you can also do inherent tokens at the native layer. It does its own tokens, which means tokens are extremely fast. You can create new tokens and then transfer them between people, buying and selling them 10,000 per second. Very, very fast and very, very cheap. 1/10 of a cent to send someone a token. Even $1 million token costs 1/10 of a cent. And then we have a consensus service, which allows you to immutably record things, but it also allows you to use our consensus algorithm and our network of trusted nodes to run a small private network of your own. You can actually use us as your consensus engine, and you get all the trust of Hedera, but the privacy of a private network, all of those things. On top of that, there's 1 million use cases and 1 million different end users, lots of different use cases and users that you can have. We have the council. You can see the various logos there of the ones that I said, UCL and the others. Swirls is there. That's the company that I am founded and am part of. And then lots of others, including DLA Piper, one of the world's largest legal firms, and a bunch of different banks. Standard Bank is the biggest bank in Africa. And Shinhan Bank is the oldest bank in South Korea. Nomura is the one of the biggest financial institutions in Japan. We just have lots of different banks, lots of technology companies, legal companies. Boeing is in aerospace. FPOS is a payments company, household name in Australia, lots of different things. And they're in different countries, in different continents, under different governments, in different industries. So there are checks and balances on each other. This is so important. This is decentralized governance. If you say anyone who holds a token can govern, that's not decentralized governance, because you'll have whales that have lots of tokens and it's not transparent. This is the most transparent governance you can do. For ESG, if you care about ESG things, so social and governance, you're going to care about this kind of thing. So that is the governing council. And we steward the network through transparent on-ledger governance. All the actual decisions are implemented on ledger. They have to send transactions that they jointly sign to make things happen on the network. And then I mentioned that we're carbon negative. So here's the problem. We do use less energy than anyone else, which is good. But then we buy the carbon credits. And ESG, many companies want to buy carbon credits. But there is an enormous amount of fraud in the carbon industry. So if you buy a carbon credit that says this kilowatt hour was created by a solar panel, that's the top one there, renewable energy. That's a pretty good thing. It's easy to measure. There's probably a fairly low level of fraud in that. But the second one is avoid deforestation. There are lots of cases where someone will sell you a credit because they saved a tree, but that tree was on a reserve that wasn't going to be cut down anyway. And that's just fraud. They're selling credits for saving trees that they didn't save. Well, that has no effect on the CO2 in the atmosphere. If you save a tree that wasn't going to die anyway, you haven't affected the CO2 in the atmosphere, and yet they'll sell carbon credits for that. So if you're interested in ESG and things like carbon credits, this fraud is a big deal. You want to buy carbon credits that have been audited, that have been verified by a third party, and then you want to verify that nobody sells the same carbon credit to two different people. This is why you'd want to use a ledger, a blockchain. If you put it on a ledger, then the whole world can see what the carbon credits are and who it was sold to. You can't double sell it. And if there's an auditing agency auditing them, their signatures can be part of the ledger as well. And you can just see when you buy it, every single one you buy, you can see that that individual one was audited at the time you buy it. In fact, even more things are possible. You can even have ledger systems that set up tokens, so these digital assets again, that take energy that is green energy, you can buy and sell that and be guaranteed it's green energy, or non-green energy bundled with a carbon credit. So you buy a single thing that both gives you a dirty kilowatt hour and the carbon credits to make up for it, and the carbon credits are audited so you know they make up for it. So this is how ledgers can really play an important part in, say, carbon credits, which is an important part of ESG. It's not all of ESG, but it's a big part of the E part of ESG, the environmental part. And so you can see that there's, well, you can just see the second biggest bar there is avoid deforestation. There's fraud in these other ones as well. But we avoid the bad ones when we buy our own credits. But also there are a lot of people building on Hedera and even on other ledgers to give markets for these and to give you trust. So what you do is you take all of these carbon credits and you put their ones and zeros into a public ledger so everyone can see it. Everyone can see that it only gets sold once. Everyone can see that it has been audited, all of those things. Critical for carbon credits and other parts of ESG. I mentioned several times that we use less energy. There was actually a impact report, a paper written by UCL that studied this, and it found that Hedera had the lowest of all the ones that they looked at. If you look at how much energy is used, if you do a single transaction on Bitcoin, it's going to cost 2 million watt hours for a transaction, which is a lot. For us, it's 0.03 watt hours for a transaction. And so what you see is that Bitcoin is using 67 million times as much energy for each transaction. And so people try to get around that with layer 2s and other ways of trying to reduce it, but it's still not very good. But even at layer 1s, even people that aren't using layer 2s for all their stuff, like Ethereum, and this is Ethereum 2.0, this is after the merge that happened recently. So after they became better at energy usage, are still 9,000 times worse than we are. What's even interesting is that even your credit card is over 100 times worse. When you spend your Visa card, you're putting more than 100 times as much carbon into the atmosphere as if you do a transaction on Hedera. So this is interesting, that there's a wide variety in how much energy is used, and it comes down to the algorithms that are being used. We're using Hashgraph, which is incredibly energy efficient, and then we also have better governance, which allows you to get trust with fewer nodes, which also reduces energy usage. There's a lot of good feedback cycles here. So this is how you can be green in the ledger itself. I would say if you're going to use a ledger, you should use a green ledger. But I would also say if you're doing something with carbon credits, you should be using a ledger to make sure that they're not fraudulent and they're not double sold. Safety and security in social communities is part of the S of ESG. You think of in the centralized world like Facebook or something, you have everybody is in a single place. They are spying on you in order to give you advertisements. What you really want is decentralized, where you have lots of different things, lots of different of these shared worlds, and they can use Hedera and they can use other ledgers and they all interoperate. That it gives you privacy. And this is something we're very interested in. There's other uses for social good, trying to record the Holocaust survivor recordings onto our Hedera. People are doing this so that they will not be lost and that you will always have a record that they existed at a certain time. There's a lot of different social goods. We'll talk about more in a second. So use cases. What are all the use cases? I started to mention it. So ServiceNow and DLA Piper are working together to tokenize real-world assets. Straight financial applications. Tokenizing a real-world asset can be tokenizing a carbon credit. I mentioned that. But it can also be tokenizing real estate, or tokenizing fine art, or expensive wine, or even gold. You can tokenize assets from the real world. Once you've done that, you can do things like sell someone a house, and the cost to transfer it is 1/10 of a cent. And you don't even need a middleman to ensure that the money and the house both swap, because you can make sure that you don't get the house unless I get the money, and I don't get the money unless you get the house. You can ensure that it's an atomic swap with no third party, no middleman. And you don't have to do a title search. You can just look in the ledger and see who currently owns the house, and you have a 100% mathematical guarantee that you are getting a house that is owned by the person selling it to you. This is what they're doing with this tokenization. And again, it's just 1/10 of a cent every time you transfer a token. It's very cheap and fast. It happens in seconds. You could find out in seconds who owns a house, and then if you wanted to buy it and it was in an online market, you could buy it in seconds. All instant. You can even keep privacy. All sorts of things, or you can have controlled privacy, all sorts of different options there. There's a lot of things you can do. LG Electronics is doing tokens of art, and they are actually building into their television sets now a wallet that can hold tokens, which is a cool concept. So the television itself can go out to the internet and go to Hedera and see where your tokens are and how many tokens you have and buy and sell tokens, all of that stuff. It's just fascinating. And then it can display the art on the television set as if it were a painting that's changing. I've seen their art too. It's beautiful. It's really cool looking. Standard Bank, I mentioned this, largest bank in South Africa, and they are doing green bonds with tokens. And so you can invest in green bonds with them. I also had another thing they did that's part of not environment, it's part of social, but they did a POC with Shinhan Bank in South Korea for remittances. So that if someone in South Korea earns South Korean won in their job, but they want to send money back home to their family in South Africa, and their family needs South African rand, the won to rand going from one bank to another was all automated through using stable coins that they minted on Hedera as well. And you could then send money for 1/10 of a cent, not for $30. And by the way, wires are actually charged in dollars. Even when you're going between South Korea and South Africa, you have to pay dollars for the wire. It's crazy. They were able to make it just be 1/10 of a cent, and it was just in H bars. You could pay in your local currency, and you had all these guarantees and transparency about what was going on. And the whole thing happens in seconds. It doesn't take days like a wire can take. So that was another thing they did, which is the S part of ESG, whereas this one is the E part of ESG. Avery Dennison. Avery Dennison, you may know, makes labels, including barcodes and RFID labels that go onto items. They are currently tracking billions of items, or they have allowed their customers to track billions of items that they're actually helping to track. And they're moving this to Hedera. And this is very cool. So it makes what they're doing much more efficient and easy, which is great. It also opens up whole new things. You could imagine you have a supply chain, you're in the process of building things, maybe you bring in parts and you put them together to make bigger parts. You can tokenize those and even do things like get loans against those as collateral, or have accounts receivable that you tokenize and you get loans against the accounts receivable. All of this can be automated by using tokens. This helps enormously. So this is something that they're doing. ServiceNow is doing ESG credits. We talked about credit markets. There are multiple credit markets now on Hedera. ServiceNow is doing that. Guardian is a very cool system that we're helping companies set up, or companies can set up, where it keeps track of your carbon footprint as you're putting carbon into the atmosphere and how many you have bought of the carbon credits, and make sure that they're balancing out, and tells you when they're not. It can get the carbon credits for you. It can measure it. It can report it to you. Guardian is a cool system. And so it's software that runs on a computer, but then it talks to the ledger to find out what's really going on. And companies now are using Guardian. I'm very excited about the Guardian project. Hala Systems is recording information like if you're in a war zone, are bombs dropping near you? All sorts of things like that, giving humanitarian information through a ledger. It is proof that it came from the right place, that you don't have the enemy telling people to go run, saying there's no bombs there and then dropping a bomb there. You have security in that way, and then it's recorded immutably as well. And then Starling is doing, I said, Holocaust survivors. They're recording histories of that and other things, and then preserving it on the ledger. And so what you will have is forever, you will see the digital signature. So if you look at the various credentials that are on the ledger, you might trust that. And you'll see a date, and the date is immutable. You know that it's never been changed after that date. You know the date it was put there, and you know that it's immutable. And then there's other things similar. I'm at time. Thank you very much. And I'll just ask if there are any questions.
Okay, can you hear me? Perfect.
I can.
So if there are any questions, please raise your hand. I'm going to bring the microphone to you.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. I have a question about, is there any plan to increase Hedera scalability for something more than 10,000 transactions per second?
Absolutely. So first of all, we've throttled it down to 10,000. It can actually handle more than that. But secondly, when we get closer to 10,000 of actual usage, we will create shards. So shards are where you have multiple little ledgers that just talk to each other and they act like one big ledger. And so if you have n shards, you're n times faster. for certain traffic patterns. So this is what we will do. So as long as, actually for most traffic patterns, you'd end up being n times faster. This is what we will do when we start getting closer to 10,000. You may have also heard people saying, hey, we do 60,000, but they're only talking about consensus, not processing. So I know of another ledger that says we can do 60,000 a second, but they can't actually process 60,000 a second. We're actually processing 10,000 a second. We've shown consensus on 300,000 a second, but we're actually processing 10,000. We can make that higher, and we will. And then when we get close to the limit that we can actually do, we will go to sharding. The important thing about sharding is that the shards, the little ledgers, have to talk to each other to act like one big ledger. And you need to trust the messages they're sending to each other. And in order to do that, you have to have something called state proofs that we are rolling out in the near future. And state proofs are where you have a cryptographic proof that this little message was the agreed upon thing from the ledger that's sending it. And so one ledger that doesn't have the history of this ledger can get a message from this ledger and know for sure that it's real. You don't need a bridge in between with validators in the bridge. You can just trust it cryptographically. It's in the cryptography itself. And so we'll be using that in our sharding. And so then the entire sharded ledger is ABFT. You have a math proof. We had a math proof that each individual ledger was ABFT. When you combine them with the state proofs, you get a proof that the whole sharded ledger is ABFT, guaranteed. And by the way, that proof has been checked by a computer, that our single shard is ABFT, has actually been checked by COQ, by a professor at Carnegie Mellon University.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions? Any other questions in the audience? If not, I have one of my own, Leemon. Just curious about the certainty that carbon credit has not been sold twice. You can be sure of that on ledger, but of course, I suppose you cannot be sure that this has not happened off-chain. I wonder if this requires also that, for instance, Hedera dominates the carbon credit, the offset market, to be a usable certainty, or what are your thoughts about it?
No, though at the moment, I think we actually are a big part of this market, but no market should ever be monopolized by a single company. That won't happen. So you don't need to know that all the carbon credits in the world are on Hedera. What you need to know is that when you're buying a carbon credit from a given person, you need to know that that person, that source, is using Hedera as opposed to a different ledger. So yes, if they were to mint a coin on two different ledgers, then you have a problem. But what you can do is you can have them digitally sign things and even have legal documents saying, we are using this particular ledger for our carbon credits. And you can put that document itself on the ledger. So then if they are lying and do it on two different ledgers, you could easily go to a court and prove that they lied. It's a very, very easy kind of fraud to catch. If they have given you a legal document and published it to the world that they have signed saying we're only using one ledger and this is the ledger we're using, then you just go to any other ledger, and if you see them do the same thing, you sue them instantly. It would be very hard to get away with that kind of fraud. And if they're doing it all in one ledger, then you're guaranteed. If it's all on Hedera, if that particular producer of carbon credits is all on Hedera, then when you buy a carbon credit minted by that producer, you know for sure that it's not being double sold, because Hedera itself stops it from being double sold.
All right, thank you very much. Very enlightening. There's another question here.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a question on the cross-border payment of the remittance. When someone has to provide the other currency, right? If in your example, who is doing this? You know, are there some market makers, or is there a pool of currencies?
So in the POC, it was if you have a checking account at the South Korean bank, Shinhan, then you from that turn it into a stable coin. The stable coin goes to the other bank. The other bank swaps it out. And, it sells one stable coin for a different stable coin. Now you have a RAND stable coin, and then the standard bank would use that and turn it into RAND for the checking account in their bank. So it's going from one checking account to another. The banks themselves are providing the liquidity in this system. You could imagine a larger system that doesn't just use pairwise banks, that uses groups of banks, and you could talk about other kinds of liquidity. But in this case, it was simply the banks themselves providing the liquidity for these remittances.
Another question here.
Thank you, Leemon. And I've just been to COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I saw how much actually their community has been doing in the space. But I still see that we have a separate climate community, separate financial community, a separate blockchain community. So what is your recipe to bridge all these communities in order for us not to lose time and actually create solutions all together with trusting to each other? Thank you.
Great question. So the world of finance and the world of blockchain are very separate worlds, and the little part where they overlap has a huge amount of fraud, which is in the news right now. And so that, the fraud itself makes them less likely to come together. But ultimately they need to, and I'm sure they ultimately will. But you're right, we want to not have it take too much time. So part of it is the blockchain world needs to grow up and stop having all these frauds. And part of that is that regulation now is coming, and we need clarity in the regulation. In addition, consumers need to understand when someone says, I'll pay you 20% interest with zero risk, those two statements don't go together. You're going to be taking on risk. If somebody's paying you 20% interest, you're taking some kind of a risk. Otherwise, all other investments in the world would go away and everyone would just invest in that. But I do think that we have been seeing finally the financial community is actually taking interest in the blockchain world, and the two are starting to come together. So like I told you about the POC between these two banks, we are seeing POCs as the first step, and then we'll see real things coming out of that. And there's a number of banks that are doing POCs on a number of different things. And PayPal has crypto now you can buy in your PayPal wallet. We're slowly starting to get sort of the normal financial world interfacing with the blockchain world. And I would just say that don't be scared off by the fact there are scams, but be careful how you do it so you avoid the scams. Look for good governance. Look for transparency when you combine. And I would encourage, and I think they actually are to some degree following this advice, I would encourage the financial world, yes, go look at what the blockchain world is doing and find ways of using it. And they are doing that. But be smart about how you do it. Find ledgers and find systems on top of the ledger where both of them are well governed, very transparent. They are something that you can trust because they're audited. As Warren Buffett says, don't invest in something unless you understand it. Make sure you understand what's going on. VC firms really need to be careful to understand. And we're going through a crypto winter right now, so maybe some of the froth has died down, which is a good thing. And we'll come out of the crypto winter in a year or so, and that'll be a good thing too. But I love that question. There is enormous benefit in the financial community of using ledgers, and you just want to not get burned while you're doing it, but you don't want to drag your feet and give up an opportunity cost by taking too long to do it.
All right, and with that, I'm sorry, we still have more questions coming, but we're running out of time and we need to stay on schedule. But Leemon will definitely forward any other questions to you, and I want to thank you for dialing in. And an applause for Leemon, please.
Thank you very much.